Well, it is obvious this morning that this is Easter Sunday of 2025, and it is a Sunday that all across the world, where more people attend in assemblies like this than any other single time of the year. The Easter holiday has long been the favorite holiday of all of who practice Christianity. And it's a time when we kind of get together as families. You remember years ago, or maybe not all that long ago, when the little girls would all get new dresses and new shoes, and the ladies would probably wear a new dress and new shoes, and maybe a new purse. And the guys didn't do that so much, but when we were kids at our house, I don't know how Mom and Dad afforded it, but we always get maybe new shirts. They were bright colored shirts. At least that's what Nick and I got. Steve was the baby, and I noticed in pictures he was always in a bright color shirt and a new tie and a sports jacket. And but remember, he's the little brother and he's the favorite of the bunch. But it's always been a special time, and I know times change, but look at the crowd this morning. I think Donnie and Joyce win the prize. I wish all of y'all just move in with Donnie and Joyce so we can have this every Sunday. And Linda has a big group here, and Susan and I have a group here. We're so thankful that all of you are here with us this morning. I want to kind of talk about the idea of what kind of Sunday this is, but I want to use this phrase that you see up on the screen. God wins every time. God wins every single time. So the Old Testament is a book where there are a lot of battles. And some of those battles that are fought, God fights all by himself. And so there's an example like this, where God will throw down fireballs from heaven and he'll destroy a city or two. He fights that battle all by himself, and he wins. There's another time when there are some people who rise up in rebellion against one of his chosen servants named Moses, and they're challenging the authority of Moses, and God just opens up the ground and swallows all these people up and closes the ground back up, and God wins every single time. But most of the time, especially in the Old Testament, God will fight his battles using other very ordinary people. And it could be a Moses, or it could be a Joshua, or it could be a David, or it could be a Gideon. All kinds of names. But every single time, God wins. Now that's one of the reasons, it's kind of a sidelight thought this morning, that's one of the reasons why it would be so futile for any of us to think, or any person anywhere to think, that they could challenge God or they could fight against God and maybe come out the victor. Don't you think that would be futile? That you could never challenge God and win, and yet people do it all the time. I saw an article last night. I didn't read it all. I just looked at the headline primarily. I saw another headline this morning where people were out this morning and out last night, and they were using this particular Christian holiday to rise up in rebellion against God. And I thought, don't they know that God wins every time? Do all of you remember that verse that Paul used in the book of Galatians, chapter 6? I know you remember it. Paul says, don't anybody be deceived. Don't let anybody convince you differently. God is not or cannot be mocked. You can't get by challenging God, because whatever you sow, that's what you're going to reap. God wins every single time. Do all of you see that and agree with that? You cannot defeat God. And so I want to tell you this one special story. This one special story where God fights the battle differently. Sometimes he's fought the battle all by himself, and sometimes he uses people. This is a story that God fights himself only in the form of a man. God fights the battle himself in the form of a man, and we call his name Jesus. It was Jesus. That's why John will say in his writings in the New Testament, Jesus was with God, but he was God. And God is going to fight this battle all by himself in the flesh. Now, the battle was brewing. It was all getting started way back at the beginning of the Old Testament. God had created two people, and he had fellowship with these two people, but Satan was and is to this day the giant enemy of God. And Satan worked against these two people, and he convinced them to follow his logic. And in their mind, they followed the logic, and then they followed that logic of their mind with action, and they sinned. And all kinds of evil things happened. Satan was so delighted that day. But to this day, every suffering, every evil that you've ever seen, that you've ever heard, that you've ever felt, comes from Satan and comes from that day. Everything comes from Satan. All the evil. And so Jesus came to this earth to fight. Only his fight was a different kind of fight. He didn't come with super muscles. He didn't come as a giant to fight, though he had defeated a giant earlier in history. He didn't come that way. What he came with was giant words. What he came with was giant kindness. What he came with was giant compassion. And people were drawn to him. Over and over again, they were drawn to him. But there were people who still mocked him, and they criticized him. And they did whip him badly. And I won't go into the details of that. That's not the purpose of this lesson. And it is absolute truth that they took God who came in the flesh as his son named Jesus. It's absolute truth. They nailed him to a cross. And he died on that cross. You ever watch one of those movies where you're so interested in the movie and there's a certain hero in the movie and you keep watching and you're falling more and more in love with the hero and you get right to the end of the story, right to the end of the movie, and the hero falls off the edge of the cliff. And you think, how can they tell a story like this where the hero falls over the cliff? And if all you watch is the old westerns like then it's the hero you've been watching all through the movie and you fall in love with this one particular guy and he walks out in the street and someone shoots and he takes the bullet and he crumples to the ground. And I get so disgusted and I think, how can they write a story like this? But then you wait just a moment. And there's another scene that comes in that movie. And you see a pair of hands up over the edge of the cliff. And apparently he caught himself, or he didn't fall that far, and he's climbing. And he's got his hands up over the edge of the cliff, and he begins to pull himself up. And your heart is so joyful because he really didn't die. Or in my old westerns, the next scene. And here the hero is in some bed. And he opens his eyes and says, how long have I been here looking at all these people? And you realize he is alive. Don't you know that when Jesus breathed his last on that cross, that Satan was absolutely overjoyed? All the suffering he had put on mankind through all the years, all the suffering, all the evil, that he had brought upon this world for all the years did not compare to the fact that Jesus had breathed his last, because Jesus was God. You can see Satan rejoicing. You can see him getting with his friends and his helpers, and they're all having this giant party, and everything is wonderful. But you know how this story goes. There's another scene. And those people who are so brokenhearted, they come to the tomb. And it wasn't in the ground burial. This one was in a cave. And they come just to pay respect, just to show their love. And the cave is opened. Can you imagine? The grave is opened. It's not supposed to be. And there's no one inside the tomb. And the message comes, why are you looking here? He's not here, he's alive. He's been raised. And they see him. And they see the one who came to do battle as the victor, even overcoming death. And everything you read in the New Testament revolves around that story. So even in 1 John, where we've been studying, look at verse 8 of chapter 3. The one who does what is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. Now, you need to underline that last thought. Jesus came to destroy Satan's work. And I know as you look around the world right now, it doesn't look like it. But look at another passage. And we're not going to read the whole passage for the sake of time. I know you got big plans today. I know you got Easter egg hunts, right? I know you've got big meals. Linda, you got a big family. You got big meals. But this is so important. This is so important. Thank you for coming here first. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, beginning in verse 51. That's where he says in verse 51, behold, I show you a mystery. And he said, we shall not all sleep in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. We shall all be changed, and this which is perishable put on imperishable. And this which is mortal put on immortality. He goes ahead and explains some things, and he finally comes to this point and he says, this is why we say, where, O death? That is kind of the worst that can happen, isn't it? Well, maybe not. There's so many bad things that Satan brings upon us because of the beginning story. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin. The power of sin is in the law, but thanks be to God, he gave us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. You know, the big question of the morning is this. Do you believe that story? The big question of the morning is, do you believe that story? I want to show you this picture. I don't want this to be a story where I put a burden on you this morning. I don't want you to leave here feeling badly. This is a story of such giant good news. This is a story of as good a good news I could ever tell any group of people. Her name is Christy. I only asked her husband a few days ago, I said, could you send me some pictures of Christy? And boom, here came 3 pictures. I just chose that one out random. 54 years old. It was last June that Christy fainted. Now, she ate everything right. She jogged several miles a week, doing it daily. She passed out. By the time Susan and I got to the hospital room at Mercy Hospital, She was already in a hospital bed, and they had already discovered that she had a cancer, a renal cancer. And it already impacted her spine so that there were tumors in her spine, a tumor in her hip. But because of connections, she was able to get a really, the world's best renal cancer doctor, a man from Germany at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas. He put her on an experimental drug and threw the best one he had at her, then a second one, then conventional treatment. And a month ago, he said to Brian and Christy, I have thrown everything at this cancer I know how to throw. It races past all of it. He said, and his words were, it is an angry cancer. Go back home and get on hospice. At this moment, Christy is maybe an hour, maybe 2 from death. As of 8 o'clock this morning, an hour or 2 from death. About a week ago, a little over a week ago, I went down to Brian's office. His office just down the hall from mine, or down the building from mine. I do this every morning when Brian gets in. And my question is always the same. How are things? And he'll give me a report. And he said, we talked last night a little bit. She could talk a little bit last night. Now, they've talked a lot. They've talked about cremation or burial. They've talked about who's to speak at her funeral. They've talked about all these things. He said, last night, I looked at her and I said, Christy, is there anything you want to tell me? And she said, yes. And she said these words, don't be afraid. I'm not afraid. And Brian went on to talk for a moment, and I said, wait a minute, Brian. Tell me again what she told you. He said, she said to me, don't be afraid. I'm not afraid. And I said, Brian, do you understand the power of what Christy has just said? Do you understand the statement of faith that she's just made? Do you understand that I personally have never heard a statement like this? And tears began to come out of his eyes, as well as mine. And I said, everybody needs to remember this statement from now on. Don't you be afraid, Brian, because I'm not afraid. How in the world would she not be afraid? Tell me how in the world any of us wouldn't be afraid, except that the battle has already been fought and the battle has already been won. And Jesus came forth from the grave, and he's able to let all of us say, there is no sting, there is no problem. What's coming is better. That's the story of Jesus. He's asking all of us to look at life and say, don't be afraid, I'm not afraid. Now, I have to tell you something. When I ask you, do you believe that story? It's easy to say, yeah, I've heard it before. I believe it. That's what Christy did. Christy believed that story so much that she made Jesus to be the one she would call master in this life. And she conformed her life to the teachings of Jesus. Now get this. Was her life easy? Was her life easy? I'm going to tell you, nobody's life is easy. One of the big concerns of Christy has been, I'm not going to make it, and I've got a 23-year-old daughter that I leave behind, as well as 2 older sons, but 23-year-old daughter. I know what it's like, because when I was 27, my mother was hit by a drunk driver in Austin, Texas, and she was killed. I know what it's like. She said, his life hasn't been easy, but she said, I'm going to follow Jesus anyway. And she was immersed into his kingdom. She was baptized. And she's tried her best to walk as Jesus would have her to walk. And we're taught to be sure. Those of you who are visiting need to know, we've been studying the book of 1 John for longer than I'd planned. John says, I'm telling you why I'm writing this book. This little tiny book of 1 John is taking us so long to get through. I'm writing it so you may know. I'm writing it so you might be absolutely sure. You might absolutely know that you are saved. Do you think she knows? You see, this is not, it's the story has a moment of sadness to it. And I know that maybe it put a downer on your Easter. I don't mean to do that. I mean to tell you this is a story of giant victory. This is what it's all about. Where else better to talk about something like this than right now on a day like this? Can you tell me a better time to remind people who gather together more than any other time of the year? God wins every single time. He wins every single time. He's going to win again today. Satan's not going to win. But he's going to keep doing damage to people. He's going to keep making life hard for people. He's going to keep discouraging people. He's going to keep making people want to give up. He's going to keep making people get mad at each other and do bad things to each other. He's going to keep bringing sickness on people. How many have been announced this morning in this little community who have cancer? He's going to keep doing that to people. But he is not going to win. He can't win. Because Jesus won. And anybody who will believe the story and make him Lord and Master and enter into his kingdom can be like that and say to the world, don't you be afraid. I'm not afraid. The only way anybody can say that is if they believe the story of the Bible. And the story of the Bible revolves around one person, Jesus Christ. Jesus, the Anointed One. So I ask you to believe it this morning. I ask you to believe it to the point you'll follow it. To the point you'll follow it. And I mean follow it all the way to the end. So every Sunday here, we take the Lord's Supper. And every Sunday, we take the Lord's Supper to remember. Remember the fact that he came in flesh. We remember the fact that he was scourged. We remember the fact that he was nailed. And all for us, so we didn't have to be afraid. And we remember the fact that he was raised from the dead on the third day. And God said, once and for all, everybody, once and for all, the price for sin is paid. I've won again. I don't lose. God wins every time.